Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from ConnectOne Bank and Chase Commercial Term Lending, the Witkoff Group, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Greenberg Traurig, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Fisher Brothers, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Foley & Lardner, Friedman, Handler Real Estate Organization, HAP Investment Developers, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Madison Realty Capital, Massey-Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Mercantile Commerce Bank, N.A., Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, Newbanks, MHP Real Estate Services, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Sterling National Bank, Sterling Risk, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Continuum Company, the CUNY TV Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
Octavia, Italy. This guy comes over at the age of 18. He has nobody here, goes to McDougal Street. He then becomes a bricklayer. He then has a son who becomes a bricklayer. The son, who's a bricklayer, goes to Italy and meets this woman. He brings home his mother. And then that guy has a son who today went into the development business, wasn't even in the property and casualty surety business, and now today is the chairman and CEO of a bank called ConnectOne Bank, a $3.5 billion institution. I'd like to say thanks to Frank Sorrentino for being here.
Thank you, Michael.
So as I was alluding before, tell me about Grandpa.
So grandfather, 18 years old, lived in Ottaviano, Italy, right outside of Naples, the foot of the Vesuvius. Came here when he was 18, 1922.
No family here, some distant relatives?
Yeah, he had a brother who came over before him, and times were not good in Italy. Came here with basically $5 in his pocket and a coat. And got a small job here locally.
Initially, he was living with his brother on McDougal?
On McDougal Street, or I think it was an uncle that he lived with on McDougal Street. His father was a mason, stone mason back in Italy, so he knew the trades. And he actually traveled the subway system or the train system throughout the boroughs looking for work.
Right.
With a trowel in his back pocket. That's it. That's all he had was a trowel. At that time, the construction business was pretty much controlled by the Irish, and Italians were looked down upon. People think, the Italians always had the construction business, but that wasn't true in 1922. And but he broke his way into the business. He ran across a particular job site where
right, and you told me that because that's a really good, interesting story. He comes to the job site, which happened to probably be run by the Irish
Yes, it was.
Building Association, and Grandpa says, I'd like to be a bricklayer. And what happens? The guy says, 2,000 bricks?
Well, can you lay 2,000 bricks a day? My grandfather was a really small, skinny guy. And there were all these big guys up on the scaffold, laying brick away. And guy yells down to him, can you lay 2,000 brick a day? And my grandfather's answer was, well, if those guys can do it up there, I can. So the guy liked his moxie and said, okay, you got a job.
So he hired him.
Yep, and that was his start.
During his lifetime, you said to me he became a union bricklayer.
Yes. Actually, I think I have his union card. that 50 years as a union bricklayer before he retired.
Now,
So
did he go out on his own?
he did. He did a lot of work on his own. So back and forth between being a union bricklayer and doing some work for himself, mostly masonry work, small-time masonry work. My father, when he came into the business later on, also was a union bricklayer.
Right. When did he move to New Jersey? Because, you know, the roots were over here.
I don't know the year, Michael.
But the
I don't
family moved.
remember. Yeah, so he went back. He met my grandmother at some point, and I don't remember exactly when that was. Came back here, and they moved to Fairview, New Jersey, from New York City. And he bought his own little house there for I don't know, $1,000 or $2,000. Needed a complete renovation, which he did all on his own. And he raised his entire family there. He had 4 children, and actually I lived there. I was born in that house.
Right. He came over in 22. Your father was born in 37.
Yep.
And your father was born in his house also in Fairview.
Yes, he was.
Now, the interesting thing is Fairview, the only thing I remember about Fairview is you have a diner and you have a couple of cemeteries right nearby.
Yes, that's true.
Right, on the hill.
Big embroidery town.
Big
A lot of small factories at the time. Good little town, you know, real big Italian-American population there at that time. Everybody on the street knew everyone. You know, these were 3 and 4 family homes with the stoop, and kids played ball in the street, and it was...
So your father is born in 37. He's one of how many children?
4. He has 3 sisters.
And when does he get involved starting to work? How did he know he was going to be destined to be a union bricklayer?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I think he worked a bit with my grandfather in his teens. Went into the Army in 1957, I believe it was, and then came back, and he also joined the union. And I think he had an easier pass getting in the union because my grandfather was in the union as well.
Now tell me the story, because that's how he met your mother. So it's like 1958 or 59.
Yes.
And he was
in the Army.
He was in the Army. He was in Korea, or
No. He was between Korea and Vietnam. It was peacetime when he served. He was in the anti-aircraft division for the Army, and he had the opportunity to go to Naples to an Army base there. And so while he was going there, his father said, "Could you bring this letter to a friend of mine who lived right outside their hometown?" And so when my father went to deliver the letter, there was a nice young woman who was washing dishes and taking care of the home, and that would be his future wife, and
so then
he brought her home.
So did he have to wait a couple of period of time to bring her in? Was it a green card?
It was, you know, they had some immigration issues to get her over to get her across the border, but nothing too difficult to get her back. And They got married in Italy and then again here in the United States.
So this is like 1959.
1959.
Now then, and your father is working with your grandfather at this time?
Well, either working in the union or with my grandfather. They did both. My grandfather had a small business called Frank Sorrentino and Son, which we then moved to Frank Sorrentino and Sons.
Right. So you're born when?
I'm born 1961.
1961, in the same house that Grandpa, father, and everyone
Yep.
has been in Fairview. So tell me about your upbringing, because you were telling me, besides delivering newspapers and doing some other things, you got involved with the construction trade at a young age. Your father would take you, because it was a way to bond, because he was working all the time.
So my father, when he was a union bricklayer, he would also do side work, and he would do that mostly on a Saturday. And so sometimes on Saturday morning, he would take Junior with him, being me. And I learned at a very early age. I don't think I was 10 years old, and I knew how to lay brick, and I knew how to mix cement, and I knew how to do whatever it was just from watching and being a part of the site. And I actually liked it. I enjoyed it. And then as I got into my teens, that became sort of my after-school, side job and Saturdays.
Now you went to parochial school.
I did. I went to, in 1963, we moved to Cliffside Park. I went to Epiphany School, which just recently closed, by the way, the Archdiocese of Newark. And then from there, I went to Bergen Catholic High School. So all Catholic schooling.
As you said before, it was Frank Sorrentino, then it was Frank Sorrentino and Son, that it became Frank Sorrentino and Sons. Did your dad want you to join? or did you want to get involved with the construction business?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think my father, was very happy. My father had 3 sons. I have 2 brothers, and we all sort of helped out in the family business. I had a head for it. I really enjoyed the business part of the business.
And how'd Mom say this?
I guess Mom was happy to see everybody together.
So you graduate, and then you decide to go to Fairleigh Dickinson in Teaneck.
Yep, night program.
The night program. So you would work during the day, and then as a union, as a bricklayer and other masonry. And
Well, by that time we were beyond that.
okay, so when did the family leave that to become more in the construction business?
So we started doing more masonry subcontracting type work, foundations and site type work for other builders and other types of masonry, all during my teens while I was going to college. As soon as I got into college, I entered the construction engineering technology program, which was sponsored by Joseph Muscarelli at Fairleigh Dickinson. It was a great program that they had for people who were exactly like me in the construction business but wanted to learn all the professional parts of the business, whether it was contract law, whether it was the accounting, whether it was estimating, project management. That was all part of this curriculum, along with a pretty good understanding of the civil engineering that goes into construction. And so as I got to learn more about the business, I wanted to do more.
Right, you said we have to expand.
That's right.
Okay, let's not only be a subcontract.
That's correct.
A contractor over there to work for somebody. Let's become the contractor.
And some of my professors in school actually became contacts and helped to propel the
So
business.
when did the family bought land to build a house?
Yep.
When did that?
That started in the mid-'80s. So we started doing some general contracting work in the early 80s. And by the mid-'80s, we started to buy our own land to build upon and do some speculative building. And we found that to be pretty good business, mostly in Englewood Cliffs. It was a good market at the time. We did a lot of the work ourselves. And so we really started to change the direction of the business at that point.
And in addition to that, you also said, that business, you have, recessions, ups and downs and all that. You said there was a market of being in the insurance business. How do you decide to get into the insurance agency business?
So besides building homes on our own property that we were selling in the speculative market, we also did construction management. And so we would build a home for you if you owned your own land. Well, one of the clients that we built for happened to be in the insurance business and needed additional capital to grow his business. We got to be talking, and we struck up a deal where we would take a 50% ownership in his insurance agency. And that gave me exposure to a whole other type of business. And it was something I coveted because, as you said, the construction business has its ups and downs. It looks like a sine wave. And I liked businesses with recurring revenue. And insurance was one of them.
Now,
another one that I started investing in at the time was banking as well.
Right. So here you are, you're a young guy. It took you 7 years because of working full-time during the time. You graduate Fairleigh Dickinson. And then it's, New Jersey has always had a number of small banks. They were known for that. I think when the laws changed in the early 70s, they decided to open up a lot of these small banks in many communities. And you took an interest in the small bank because you were bringing to them, you wanted to get a loan.
That's right.
So what happens? You're over there on a loan.
Well, we needed, being in the construction business and developing homes, we needed construction financing. And I went to my local small bank in Englewood Cliffs, had a great relationship with the CEO there. But when I looked at the loan documents and I looked at what was happening, I was making payments to the bank on a regular basis, whether the sun came out, whether it rained, whether it was too cold to work, it didn't matter. I had to make those payments.
Right, you didn't have the seasonality.
That's right. And actually, in future projects that I had done in the construction arena, I started making loans to clients to be able so that they could fund their projects, and I became the bank. And that really got the wheels turning about this recurring revenue concept.
Now, but what also happened was this was a time that if you picked the right bank, and literally it was the right bank, because as we were saying when we got together, I had known a couple of the banks that we both knew, one called Morsmere Federal, and then there was City Federal, and these others who left the business because they even went further than that. They went into banking and they also went into construction business.
That's right.
So they decided to become more involved, and which created other problems. You started to invest in a number of these banks because they were traded on the pink sheets in many cases. Or
In some cases, not even. They were privately traded. My father had this philosophy of investing in what you know. And the banking business at that time was not something that was exciting, but it was something I knew. I understood what banks were doing at that time because that was one of the quote unquote vendors we were using, right?
Right. So
we made investment. Not only did we borrow from those banks, I would make investments in those banks. Well, lo and behold, bank gets sold. Make a lot of money. It's like watching paint dry while you own it, but all of a sudden the bank would be sold and we'd make a lot of money. And I wound up making lots of investments in lots of
Right, so you bought a couple, and then, as you said, there was one which was acquired by Bank of America, Bank of New York, which was a large bank that was New York.
That was National Community
National
Bank.
Community Bank and all the others. And subsequently, you're in a situation that all the banks that you were trying to deal with, they're no longer there because they're being picked up by PNC, Bank of New York, Chase. The world had changed.
Michael, it happened to me 3 times. And, in my business, it's very important to have a relationship with those you do business with. And banking was an important part of the relationship. When the 3rd time occurred that the bank that I was doing business with was purchased, yes, I was happy as an investor, but I was not happy as the client of the bank. And when I looked around the marketplace in which we were doing business in, I said, oh my God, this is one of the most highly valued
Right,
markets.
we were talking because Worth magazine had listed the market of the Alpine, the Bergen County.
10 highest per capita zip codes in the country, and 3 of them were markets I was building in, and one of them was a market I lived in. And the last bank that got sold was the bank I was doing business with, and now that left no one in the marketplace.
So what happens? You wake up one day, say,
Pretty much.
I'm not gonna, I'm gonna slight because you were still in the construction business.
Yes,
okay?
I am.
And you were also in the insurance business as an agent
Yes.
over here. So you had these businesses, and you go home to your wife and you say, what?
I said, I have this crazy idea. I think I want to start a bank. I'm tired of moving my relationship to some other bank only to watch it be sold and disrupt our relationship. And I can't find a bank today that understands the needs of a small to medium-sized business owner, which was what we were at the time. And so I just said, you know what? I think I'm going to start a bank. And my wife looked at me and said, how do you start a bank?
So how do you start a bank? How do you go around? You go around to 12 friends, like the minions of people, and say, hey,
at that time, if you would have looked in my investment portfolio, you would have seen I owned about 20 or 25 different bank names. And so it wasn't unusual for me to spend the Sunday reading, a 10Q or a proxy statement. And so I knew a little bit about the business. I had read the news. I had watched banks go from the de novo stage, through an acquisition or whatever. And so I knew a little bit about the different players that were in the marketplace.
So what year was this?
This is 2004. And so there was an attorney in the state who's actually still our, general counsel for the company, who specialized in bank de novos. There was also a bank consulting firm in the state of New Jersey called FinPro, who did de novo bank applications. Again, this is all public information, and I did my due diligence. I contacted both of those individuals, had a meeting with them, and said, hey guys, I'm thinking about starting a bank. What do you do? And they gave me the checklist of things you need to do, starting with raising capital. That was always the most difficult part.
Which is the hardest part. So how much capital did you raise in 2004?
So in 2004, the State Department of Banking had a minimum requirement of $6 million to start a bank. And after thinking about our business plan and what we wanted to do and how we wanted to grow, we thought 12 million was the right number. And one of the things that was driving that number was I wanted to have a very quick application process. So I didn't want the state to have to think, or the FDIC to think about the capitalization of the institution. There were banks that were being chartered at that time with 8 million or so in capital. We actually sought to raise 10, and we had an oversubscription to 12. And a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. We actually raised 22. I had a very difficult decision to make. Do I return the 10 million because we were capped out at 12 under our business plan? If I didn't do that, I would have lost a lot of time. I would have had to refile. So we returned $10 million in capital.
Very hard to return.
Which is hard to do. Some of the shareholders were very upset with us for doing that. But don't forget now, this is April, May of 2004. We received our charter in January of 2005. It was one of the fastest applications through the state.
So during that period of time, over the next couple of years, you do 9 raises in total.
We do.
And what also happens is...
And those were interesting years, Michael.
Right, we had up years, bad years, and all the rest. We won't talk about the recession of 2008, 2009. But what happens is, in order to grow again, you decide that you have to take on a new job, because you were chairman. You were
That's
chairman
correct.
of the bank. You were still working in the construction business.
I was.
So, here we are. You could be a chairman of the bank, and you can also run a business which you were running. Now the real story goes crazy, because now you tell your wife, I got to take a pay cut.
That's right.
And in reality, to become a full-time banker.
Yep.
What happened over there? What was that situation?
Well, in 2007, the bank is 2 years old, and we're doing really, really well. Growth is off the chart. We're the fastest growing bank, community bank in the state of New Jersey ever in its history. The philosophy, the strategy behind what we were, we didn't really see ourselves as a bank. We saw ourselves as a customer service organization that was there to provide financial services and products to the clients. The management team we had, however, had a slightly different thought process around what they thought and what their work ethic was and what their definition of sense of urgency was. And it didn't align with either mine or the board's, and we decided to make a change. The problem was we couldn't find another bank CEO who fit the mold that we wanted, and we were a de novo institution as defined by the State Department of Banking, which means you had to have a CEO background in order to be the CEO. I call it the Marx Brothers rule. So we wanted to look outside the banking industry. We couldn't do that. We were prohibited by the State Department of Banking regulation. And so someone got the bright idea that I should take over as CEO. I said, I have to think about it. I went home, I told my wife, I said, I have good news, I have bad news. I said, I think I'm solved for the midlife crisis. I'm switching jobs. The bad news is I'm taking a big pay cut. And in January of 2007, I became the CEO of what was then North Jersey Community Bank.
So now we have this small little bank that was, originally $12 million in capital. So what happens in 2004? 2014, 13 and 14.
Well,
ConnectOne.
A lot happened between 2007 and 2014. In 2013, we did our initial public offering. We rebranded the company to ConnectOne Bank. And so we did this whole entire rebrand package, and we did an IPO. And keep in mind, in late 2012, when we were planning the IPO, that was not exactly the most robust of times. We were about to go through a presidential election. Nobody knew what was really going to happen. If you were to read the headlines in August of 2012, you would read about the fiscal cliff, double dip recession. No one knew where we were headed at that point in time. And we decided that was the perfect time to do our IPO. So it was the first IPO for financial institutions since the Great Recession. I don't believe there was any other major capital raise that was done above book and not to fill a capital hole for an institution. So it was treacherous water that in which we decided to do our IPO. But the IPO, we raised $50 million. It was oversubscribed by, I believe, 6 to 1. And we raised money at a significant premium over book. And we sort of opened up the floodgates for bank IPOs. Many followed after us there. We were the first to use the President's Jobs Act in the IPO process. And that really gave us the capitalization to then turbocharge our growth. Past $1 billion in assets.
Right, and the next step is the merger.
So a year after we do our IPO, we announced the merger with Center Bancorp, who was a $1.6 billion institution at the time. We were approximately 1.1 or 1.2. When we closed the transaction, we were just a shade over $3 billion, and sitting here today, we're at $3.5 billion in assets.
So it's an interesting road. So during this period of time, we talk a number of times during our discussion about this woman who you had to tell her, one day I'm going to become a banker, and the second thing is I'm taking a pay cut. So tell me about how you met your wife. That was an interesting story also. You didn't go to Naples.
All things revolve around construction. So for those who don't know, my wife's maiden name is also Sorrentino. and no relation. She comes from a part of it. By the way, if you go to Sorrento, Italy, everybody's named Sorrentino. But she was the receptionist at a book publishing company in Palisades, New York, and we were doing some construction work on that facility.
But there were three brothers.
And so it was my father and my two brothers. We show up there one day. We're going to work on one of their projects, and my father notices on the door the nameplate N Sorrentino. So he knocks on the door to see who was in there, and lo and behold, there was my future wife Nancy, and he introduces her to his three sons, and I just put my arm out and told my two brothers, this one's mine. Three children, 31 years
So
later.
tell me about the children.
So I have three boys today, 29, 26, and 23.
And their names and what
Frank,
do they do?
Anthony, and Joseph.
And
In that
Frank
order.
does
Frank
what?
is the fourth. Frank Sorrentino. We call him Frankie Quattro.
Pop's still working. You know, Frank's
He's still working today.
yeah,
That's
he's
correct.
still working. Your dad is alive and healthy and still doing Frank Sorrentino and Sons.
That's
okay?
correct.
Is Frankie Sr. working also? What's he doing?
So my oldest son works for a financial consulting firm. He actually does bank consulting and some capital markets work. My middle son works for a PR firm here in the city, down on 23rd and Park. And my youngest son works in digital advertising and digital marketing.
And no Frank Sorrentino, the
No,
fifth already?
no,
Nothing, no marriages yet?
no marriages. As my wife would say, no one's even seriously dating.
So in addition to all this, you know, you decided a couple of months ago, or maybe was part of your business plan, to leave the Garden State and also expand into the metropolitan area. And in June of this year, just a couple of weeks ago, you moved to what,
551 Madison Avenue.
and you're opening up a full-service operation over here.
Yes. So, you know, being in the markets that we serve in New Jersey, there's clearly this natural complement to have a presence here in New York City. We do somewhere around 7 to 8% of our balance sheet is in the New York metro market anyway. We have lots of contacts here. We have lots of people or lots of our clients who may either be headquartered here or in New Jersey and do business on either side of the river. So it was a real natural progression for us to come across the river and open up our first office in New York State. We don't see ourselves anymore as a New Jersey-based institution. We really see ourselves as a New York metro area institution, and we think this is the market in which we want to be lending in.
And you know, knowing the banking community as well as I know the banking community, you've really grown the bank. So, you know, the kid who could have been, you know, I don't know how many bricks you were laying a day, but you
I
know,
was a pretty good bricklayer.
Okay, you're a pretty good bricklayer, okay, who decided that, you know, there are other avenues, and, you know, it's destiny in many cases, like how you met Nancy and how you got into the, you know, the insurance brokerage business and evolved from a bank investor of buying stocks, not as a speculator, but playing the game on that business to be a very successful banker. And I'm very happy that you were here today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for the opportunity.